Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Not That Bad, a movie podcast, the show where we take movies people don't like and we tell you why we think they're not that bad. We got an interesting episode today, but first we got our regular intro to go through. I, of course, am one of your co-hosts. My name is Connor, aka Judge Dredd's goofy imaginary brother, Drop Dead Dredd, and I am joined today by my illustrious co-host, Mr. Gabe Tice. Gabe, how you doing today, buddy?
I've been judge dreading this episode.
How many puns are we going to be able to fit into this
Just
episode?
one. That's it.
Are you sure? I
We
don't
got it
know.
out of the
We
way.
got it.
No more.
Well, let's see if we can hold ourselves accountable there. If you haven't guessed by the title, Gabe's background, or our puns so far, we're covering the 1995 action flick Judge Dredd, starring Sylvester Stallone. This is a movie that is interesting to say the least, directed by Danny Cannon and currently sitting at a 2.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Um, Obviously, this fits the criteria of our show, but I'm curious if you have any background with the Judge Dredd film. Any background at all with Judge Dredd, the movie, or the source material?
Well, I have a lot of background with the source material,
Oh,
especially after having seen the Karl Urban movie back in 2012. Much more acclaimed and much more accurate to the source material. I've never read the
yes.
comics, but that movie is definitely held in a lot of reverence. And this movie is now brought up as the sort of remember when they made a Judge Dredd movie with Sylvester Stallone and he took off his helmet? Thank God they did the Karl Urban movie all those years later. So that's really all my history with Judge Dredd. I mean, I know bits and pieces of his lore, and I've been meaning to check out the comics, but my only real exposure before this episode was seeing that Karl Urban movie.
Interesting. So I actually also started my fandom of Judge Dredd through that movie. It was on Netflix at the time. I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but that's how I was introduced to the film several years ago. And I got very into Judge Dredd. I read a lot of the comics online. In fact, I have my favorite comic of his, which is very controversial. I'm going to start our controversy with our comic book fans right away because my favorite Judge Dredd comic is Judgment on Gotham, the crossover with Batman that took place in the mid 90s. Maybe around the time this came out. I think this was 96 or oh, it was 91, so a little earlier. Yeah, I like the Judge Dredd character. I'm not very protective of his lore, so I'm interested to get into this movie. This is a movie that I've known about for years. I think I just watched it for the first time about 2 or 3 years ago, and oh boy, I'm ready to talk about it today. This was my pick, so once again, I'm making Gabe watch something very much against his will. But what do you say we talk a little bit about Judge Dredd?
I knew you'd say that. No, let's talk about it. Let's just dive in.
I was wondering which one of us would say that first.
And like the movie, I say it in a situation that does not warrant it at all. In fact, it didn't make sense, but I said it anyways.
Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about some of the things we enjoy about Judge Dredd. And I'd like
Yeah,
to start with you here. What's something that you can kind of lob up into the air about something you like about about this movie?
dude, this discussion is going to mirror our talk about the Super Mario Brothers movie a lot because
This
the
movie
things
is
I
a
like
lot like it,
a
honestly.
lot like it.
In a really weird way. These two movies are sort of like cousins.
Yeah, not a family reunion I'd want to go to, right?
Come on, man.
All right.
Oh, come on,
So
man.
starting with the things I liked, like the Super Mario Brothers movie, I do like this film's vision of the future, at least in its own isolated context. Just this is a dystopian action movie. The production design is pretty interesting. There's sort of a kind of steampunk Blade Runner sort of thing going on. There's a lot of Star Wars too with the design of these the dread armor or the judge's armor and a lot of the motorbikes and vehicles. I like the way the guns look for some reason. I like how sleek they are, but they're also very compact and efficient. So the way this movie was designed visually is something I can compliment on the whole. There are things that haven't aged so well, but I'm not going to pick on that. Uh, other than a few really unfortunate shots towards the end as Sly hangs off the Statue of Liberty. On the whole, yeah, I give a thumbs up to the production design and the art design of this movie.
Oh, dude, like the world they built for this film is just like the Mario Brothers. It's sort of amazing what they could come up with, and it's weird how similar they are when you look at like the production design and the production value of the films are very similar. The vehicles are a little similar. There's a lot of similarities between the two and how they envisioned a sort of dystopian in a weird way dystopian future. I don't know that Mario Brothers is really a future more than an alternate timeline, but yeah, this is like that's my first pro as well. I think the way that they built the world that this movie's taking place in and everything we see, the things that they discuss about where they are in history, I guess you could say, different historical events that have happened up until that point, and just everything that you can kind of take in about this world that we're experiencing this movie within. I loved it all. I don't think that there was a bad spot for me. Even the spot that you highlighted, it added a little bit of charm for me. So
In a
yeah, I would
nostalgia
agree with
way
you.
or in a this holds up way?
Not in a this holds up way. I don't even know if it was so much a nostalgia way as much as like I do definitely have some nostalgia for things before my time. Which spoiler, this movie is before my time, but by a little bit, by a little. But I do think that there are some things about a movie that can endear it to me, even honestly, it doesn't age well. If I'm already enjoying some of the experience that I'm getting, I could take a moment like that and say like, oh, that's like it adds a little bit of charm for me. It doesn't take me out. It makes me chuckle a little bit maybe, but it doesn't take me out.
It's a fine line, right, between charm and cringe when it
It,
comes to a situation like this movie.
it can,
And
yeah.
most of Sly's career, outside of movies named Rocky and Rambo, really tightrope uh, that line. I really did enjoy Diane Lane in this movie. I'm a fan of hers in general, great actress, in addition to being a very pretty lady. This is sort of one of her first big movies, I want to say. She did a few of Francis Ford Coppola's sort of passion projects in the 80s, but this might be the first time she was in something that you would consider a blockbuster, right? And then obviously now she's in the DC movies as Martha Kent, and she's done a lot of things, but she's the most rational character to me. She's the only character who has a performance that I relate to in some way, that endeared me in some way. And her character has to deal with an interesting sort of philosophical conundrum that this universe presents her, right? She wants to be both a rational person with a private life, with a personal life, but she also wants to uphold the law in this really, frankly, authoritarian regime. So I honestly wish that she could have been the star of the movie.
She was my favorite character in this movie. I think everything that you said, I completely agree with. I mean, she's gorgeous, always has been, always will be. I think she does extremely well. And the character they give her, I mean, like, we've talked a lot on this podcast about so many times where we think a character sort of outdoes the role that they were given. But I think they wrote the role pretty well for her
Mm-hmm.
overall. I think the character was well developed enough that I don't think that was the case here. I think it was a compliment, not a detriment. Like an episode that we did covering Girl Next Door, we talked about how Alicia Cuthbert sort of like rose above her role. I don't think she does that in this movie, but I also don't think that's I don't think that's a problem because she does exactly what she was supposed to do, and she knocks it out of the park for me. She's my favorite character in this, and I'm very, very glad that you brought her up as one of your pros because I was just so excited to talk about her in this. I love her character and her performance.
Yeah, again, I was just happy to see her in this. I was happy
Yeah.
to see her given a role that was worthy of her talents. Right? Again, she does get to do some pretty interesting things. She's a lot more than just a love interest, but unfortunately, they still have to throw in a smooch at the end. A good
They always
old
did back then.
Sylvester Stallone smooch.
No
Um,
woman could be a prominent role in a movie unless they were a love interest in the mid '90s. Well, most of them,
uh,
action movies for the most part, for the at the
Honestly,
very
that
most.
was basically the rule until just recently. Another cool casting choice, Max von Sydow. I don't know what the fuck he's doing in this, but he's there.
Yes, he is.
Probably
He
got
kicks
a
ass.
nice, he probably got a fat paycheck. Probably more than he would ever see doing those stupid Ingmar Bergman movies. God.
Well, I ask less in this movie about what he's doing here than I do in like Dune. You know, the original Dune. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing here?
But
This I'm
Dune
like,
is like an epic,
I guess so. Yeah,
prestigious
this felt
property.
like they were trying to make an epic. Even though I picked this movie, I can admit that they I think missed the mark a little bit on making this the big epic that they thought it would be. But I do think it's a I mean it's a competent production. You can at least say the production of the movie
Mhm.
was rather competent.
I would say that half of this movie is trying to be an epic, and then the other half is trying to be the Sly Stallone program because behind the scenes, he was ordering changes to the script to make it more comedic. I'm sure at no point did he even humor the idea of never taking off the helmet, which is something that's very integral to Judge Dredd from the comics. Even I know that. I've never read a comic
Right.
of this character, and I'm sure that was not even on the table for Sly. You know, he is in the middle of what I call the humbling period of his career. After being the biggest star or one of the biggest stars, he, a lot of projects didn't pan out, and that was partly due to his ego really demanding a lot. When we get to the negative section, I would really like to dwell on this because so many of my issues, I'm sure, stem back to Sylvester Stallone and his ego as he approached this project.
You know, I actually want to throw a proposal at you. We're not going to quite get there yet. I do have a few more things to say before we get there. However, I do think that this is one of those episodes where we can kind of smash together our bad and our ugly section because I think a lot of our complaints, or at least a lot of the complaints that I think you may have, will kind of align with what our audience was thinking as far as what I could read in reviews. And I think that that might be a good opportunity with Sly being one of the points of topic in that because the audience did have a lot to say about him too. I think their voice will be somewhat similar to yours. So that's definitely something that we can look at once we get there. While we're still in the good, I want to throw something at you, and I don't know that you'll agree with this. I don't know that you'll agree with this at all, but I really dug the cinematography in this movie too. I think it's shot very well. I think it's kind of cool to see a movie from this time period with this type of eye for good shots because I don't feel like a lot of movies then kind of focused on that. Like this focused on a lot of like lens flares, you know, anamorphic lens flares, and tried to do something kind of cool with some of the sci-fi shots that they did. With I just think overall this movie is shot very well, and I'm curious if you have any agreements to that, or if you even have an opinion on that. If you'd like to counter it potentially,
It's cool. It's not something I have a problem with.
just not something,
It really
just not
didn't.
something that's a huge pro.
Well, it's a huge production, so it's as good as I would expect. At no
Okay.
point was I amazed, and at no point was I disgusted. Right? I'm right there in that this is fine zone as far as how this movie looks. Just the whole thing. I mean, I will go a step further, I guess, and say I can imagine that this DP, this director of photography, has gone on to do other things because I think he or she really showed off some skill with lighting and composition. I don't think the director, Danny Cannon, probably did them any favors. And again, a lot of the cinematography to me is in reverence of Sylvester Stallone. I think they were told to shoot him like a bronze god. There's a particularly egregious series of shots where Judge Dredd is stripped of all of his armor after getting framed. And what should be a very vulnerable moment for the character is instead, and it's a good time to show off those freaking biceps, bro. That dude
Shredded.
lifts, bro.
Shredded. Well, I will say that not only did he go on to do better things, maybe, depending on how you feel about some of these movies, he did have an accomplished career, the cinematographer did, because the cinematographer on this movie is Adrian Biddle. Uh, and he was the cinematographer for movies like V for Vendetta, The Princess Bride, Aliens, the Mummy movies, Event Horizon, and Thelma and Louise. So a lot of very cool productions behind this guy's belt.
Wait, you're saying he did The Princess Bride?
Yes, The Princess Bride.
One of my favorite movies of all time. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Better. Better is definitely the word.
Well, that was also before this, so like, he had some time from 87 to 95 to kind of fall a little bit, if you want to say that.
Yeah.
Because after this movie, he did like The World Is Not Enough. He did 101 Dalmatians. He also was a cinematographer for Willow, which is another movie that's pretty beautifully shot, no matter what you think about it.
Of course.
Shanghai Nights, which not a great movie, but shot pretty well. Rain of Fire, which like nobody ever talks about. I'm not saying it's a good movie. I haven't seen it in probably 20 years, so I don't know. But I don't remember it looking particularly ugly when I was a small child. So I mean, Aliens is a big one for me. Like that movie is beautiful.
He shot Aliens.
Yes, Aliens
You
and
know,
the two Mummy movies.
the whole
Yeah.
time I was thinking that this movie looked like a, a decent emulation of James Cameron.
See, that's interesting you say that because I thought it looked like a decent emulation of Blade Runner. I thought they were going for a Blade Runner like
I thought the set
shot
design looked a
build.
lot like Blade Runner, but the cinematography,
I guess you're right in that.
the lighting looked a lot. I mean, James Cameron loves that hard lighting,
He does.
and he loves to use a lot of oranges, a lot of reds. I'm thinking of the iconic climax from Terminator 2, and I definitely
Yes.
saw flashes of that here. So no, the cinematography is far from bad, but now I'm a little not disappointed, but I realize this is far from the DP's best work. It seems like he probably was hampered. Like, or this wasn't a passion project for him. At least I doubt it.
No, I mean, and it's not even in his top 10 most popular movies on Letterboxd. So, like, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna say it's his best work. But I am gonna say that I really did like the cinematography in this film. It is something for me. While with you, it didn't impress. It did stand out for me. So I did want
That's
to make
fair.
sure I highlighted it while we're, still in the good section.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah,
Talking
we're
about the
talking
good.
about the good things. There's more good things that I have to say, but I'm going to save them because they're going to have to do with some things we talk about
Yeah.
later. So, anything else that you wanted to bring up before we talked about some of the bad and some of the ugly?
Why don't we talk about the best scene in my opinion? And to me,
Ooh.
this scene should have been the whole movie. And it feels like every single decent idea they had, they put into this one scene. The final confrontation, the only real confrontation between Judge Dredd and his clone brother Rico. Uh, they have they have a whole conversation, a whole dialogue about themes of justice and life and preservation and freedom. And Rico reveals his master plan of creating an army of clones. By the way, I wish this was a sequel so it could be Judge Dredd 2 Attack of the Clones.
Judge
Would have been perfect.
Dredd Episode 2 Attack of the Clones.
Yeah. So, and this is probably the most I like the performances of either Sylvester Stallone or Armand Asante.
I want to say that's how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
Yeah, Armand
So,
Asante is the best way I would say it.
I mean, to me, these themes almost came out of nowhere. Like they started dropping in lines about how you destroyed your life to embrace justice. I destroyed justice to embrace life. I wanted a real dynamic between hero and villain throughout this movie, like a Professor X and Magneto. but I feel like I only got that in this one scene, which is so it's a mixed thing. It's got an asterisk next to it, but this is a moment where I sat up in my chair, but then I remembered that the movie was only 10 minutes longer, so these ideas weren't really going to go anywhere. But it was nice that it was here at some point, because I dismissed this movie as one of those failed Sylvester Stallone vehicles that was just a vanity project.
Yeah, dude, honestly, like, and I'll talk a little bit more about the rest of the story as we go into the next section. But discussing that part in particular, like when they introduced that whole section of the movie, I was enthralled, man. I was loving it. Ever since we sort of learn who this guy is and what his intentions are and what he's doing, I loved that. And once they had this confrontation where you see both extremes, after, by the way, Sylvester Stallone's character of Judge Dredd has had a very good reason to doubt the validity of the laws that put him into a terrible situation to begin with. And you have this character who's already just the personification of anarchy. It was awesome to me, and the dialogue that they shared was very well written, which didn't even as a fan of this movie, I can admit that the dialogue throughout the movie is not super strong. But throughout that whole ending of the movie, the last maybe 30 minutes or so, I was like, did they switch writers for the last bit of this movie? Because it was great. Like, the dialogue they were sharing back and forth, the things they were saying were very powerful and just sort of like, trying to be thought provoking. I think they did it in a couple of parts. So yeah, man, like I love that whole angle that they started pulling. I don't know that I share the same sentiment that I don't, that you didn't like how it was so late in the movie. I do think it should have been given a little bit more time. But I will say I did that whole part of the movie. I would definitely count as a pro.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that we agree on that. I think that is the standout moment from the movie. And I think it's like, it feels like something that would have been from the comics. Like this felt
It
like,
does, yes.
yeah, this actually felt like, I think the reason why the writing stands out is probably because they took direct inspiration from the comics, which I understand are
They very
very
well
well
may have,
written.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, they are. They are. Judge Dredd is very well beloved by comic readers, as far as the ones who are really into his stuff as
I
just a
can tell.
symbol. Um,
Yeah,
and I feel like Judge Dredd more than anything as a character, and comic fans may jump down my throat for this, but it feels more like he is a symbol more than a character. He stands
absolutely.
for something. And when he speaks in the stance of whatever he stands for in that particular case. And of course, he was created as sort of a personification himself. So you know, I think putting that in the movie is the very least you could do when when making it. So I'm glad that they included it, especially when deviating from some of the other things that the comic books did sort of put into law, for lack
Yeah,
of a better
some
term.
of the other things. The law. You said it. The
Yeah.
law.
I am the law. Anyways, so yeah, anything else you wanted to highlight before we move forward? All right, let's just move forward. I'm just gonna push us right into the good. I'm sorry, the bad and the ugly sections. And if I could, I'd like to just highlight something very minor, real quick, just to get it out of the way. You're not gonna agree with me on this, and I don't know that anybody's gonna agree with me on this. But if you're asking me, if you're going to introduce this villain that we're supposed to be absolutely terrified of, or that's supposed to be very menacing and scary, please, for the love of God, don't name him Rico. There has not been a tough man named Rico in the history of any names ever.
That was his
Please
name
do
in the
not name your villain
comics.
Rico.
That was his name in the comics.
I don't care. I don't care. I don't like it. I
So
just
one
don't
of the
like
few
it.
things that they actually did bring from the comics, that's something you didn't like.
I didn't. No, I didn't like the name Rico. I think I think it was a bad name in the comics. I think it's a bad name anywhere. I think if you have a character named Rico, I think of somebody very flamboyant or quite literally a penguin from Madagascar, because that's what it is.
You
I
don't think
don't
of
think
the hit song Rico Suave from 1991,
that
the
is
year
also
that
what I
this
think
movie
of.
came out?
That is
No,
also what I
not
think
the year
of.
this movie came
No,
out.
that it was a few years before.
That's
But
the year the Judge Dredd Batman crossover came out. My
Judgment
bad.
on Gotham available at all fine retailers, probably no resellers. Buy it at your local resale shop. But anyways, yeah, that's just one minor thing I had to let out. I know if they wanted to stay faithful, I think that's the one part they should have taken away. I don't like the name Rico. That's just on me. I get people won't be with that. I just don't. I just don't get naming your villain that in any sense of the imagination. I'm not counting it against the movie. It's just something I wanted to bring up as a nitpick of like what the fuck. But I'd like you to introduce us to something you don't like about this movie. And maybe since I read like a ton of reviews for this, I'll let you know if it aligns with some audience opinions that I saw.
All right. Let's just get
Oh
this
my
out of
god,
the
he just
way.
brought out a scroll.
Let's get this out of the way right now. Rob Schneider. I might as well move to the next point, but
No,
Rob
we need to talk
Schneider,
about this. It aligns with an audience complaint, yes.
I don't care if I don't care if I'm the only man on earth who felt this way. And look, we are not doing this show to jump on bandwagons. I know Rob Schneider is cool to hate on. If I liked Rob
Yeah.
Schneider, if I liked his performance in this movie, I would defend him. Boy, the, he, he is so bad for this movie in ways that run so deep. He is not just not funny, he is a comedy vampire who sucks any potential of humor from every scene he's in. Okay? And the sad thing is his character could have been really important for this movie because the movie plays it up like Judge Dredd is actually reevaluating his whole philosophy on the law. He's trying to figure out whether or not if he's become a machine for the law, where's his humanity? And Rob Schneider is a criminal that he helped put away for really minor charges. And the way the movie should play out is this sympathetic criminal helps Judge Dredd discover that humanity once again. But Rob Schneider is so annoying that I think sending him to a penal colony would be very well justified in real life. Not talking about fiction. I think anybody who did anybody who's done two grown-ups movies, I think that's a felony.
Oh no.
I think that's a felony.
Oh God. Well, let me just pile onto this apparently because not only did the audience completely agree with you, almost every negative review I read, Rob Schneider's name was in, but I completely agree. I fucking hate this guy as a person and as a comedian. I think there are things Rob Schneider. And believe it or not, I actually do enjoy some bad Rob Schneider movies and some decent Rob Schneider movies and performances. I think he's great in Home Alone too. I think he's awesome in that.
Because
I
he's
can even
barely in it.
because he's barely in it. I can even enjoy Deuce Bigelow or what was a Hot Chick. You know that's a terrible movie, but it's not the worst thing ever to watch in the world. Believe it or not, I even like the two Grown Ups movies. I
I
don't
don't
hate
believe
those.
that.
I
I
I don't hate those.
You're
Believe it or not,
testing me here.
Grown Ups is on my list of potential movies for this show. Maybe I'll make you watch it one
Then
day.
find a new co-host.
Um, yeah, no, it's not really on my list. But in all seriousness, I don't hate Rob Schneider's performances all the time, but he is everything unlikable about Rob Schneider is present in this movie, and it's to the movie's detriment. You're not supposed to hate this character. He's supposed to be a flawed character that you end up feeling for and relating for as the movie goes on and he goes into bad situations and you're gonna some people might think I'm crazy. Maybe it was because Mario Brothers was in my head this whole time, but I just kept thinking how much better John Leguizamo would have been in this role. I would just anybody else, but John Leguizamo was coming into my head this whole time of like, God, he could have given such a better performance because the lines aren't even that bad. Like his lines throughout most of the movie are not terrible, and they could be funny,
The lines
but
are terrible. I don't
they're
know
they're
if you're
not all
talking about
terrible.
um the stuff that was clearly scripted or the stuff that was clearly improvised. I
The
think,
stuff that was clearly improvised is the problem.
but I don't even think they had a good line for him. I think the director probably leaned on Rob Schneider's improv abilities, this superstar of improv.
Well, see, but here's the thing, right? Like, there are lines in this movie that are delivered within story context that are supposed to be funny, and almost are. But this guy is so unlikable that they're not funny, and they're not, and they don't get you to feel any certain way either. The only thing you're thinking this whole time is, "Oh my God, when is this fucking guy gonna die?" And that's I don't want Rob Schneider to die, nor do I want him to go to prison in real life,
Ooh,
like
you're
my
so
co-host
noble,
suggestion.
Connor.
Um,
You don't want Rob Schneider to go to prison.
However,
Virtue
I do
signaling.
think his performance in this movie is just awful, and I just having somebody in this role that could have been a likable side character would have been so much more effective than a guy who's just coming off of Saturday Night Live as not a fan favorite, who's coming out of a Home Alone movie as not a fan favorite, who at this point has done nothing to warrant a role like this. And I'm all about giving chances to somebody, but not when it's fucking Rob Schneider. He's just not likable enough. Am I crazy by saying that?
There it is. That's the track, baby.
No, you're not crazy. You heard that, right? It's perfect. Perfectly
I
timed.
feel honestly, you know what? That timing was so perfect. I feel completely validated with my
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. That's the track, baby.
That's the track.
Rob Schneider is just not likable. You know what? That's the track, baby.
That's our new catchphrase for the show.
We have a better catchphrase than Judge Dredd. God,
Oh
God,
God,
this
is
movie.
that your
Okay.
next one?
I don't know. Yeah, let's stop
Now,
beating up on.
is it Sylvester Stallone that we're going to be talking about, or are we talking about like something else in this part?
Why beat around the bush, man? This is a Sylvester Stallone movie. It's so much a Sylvester Stallone movie that Diane Lane spends more time wearing a judge helmet than Sylvester Stallone does. Like, holy shit. Let's just talk about it, man. This is so egregious what Sylvester Stallone did to this project. And I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I feel like as soon as they cast him, that was it. The project was more or less doomed because his ego was out of control in this period. I love Sylvester Stallone. Rocky probably is one of my favorite movies. And if you're a screenwriter, the story of how Sylvester Stallone made Rocky is it's one of the most heartwarming things, and he's an icon to me for that
Extremely
reason.
inspirational. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you have so many amazing moments in his career where he proved his critics wrong with movies like Rocky Balboa or First Blood. Here he's proving his critics right. Every problem that you could have with Sylvester Stallone, the action star, is just littered throughout this movie. So before I go off, I mean, I imagine you have a lot of thoughts about Sly, about his career and what this movie means to him. So why don't I pass it along to you?
So, as far as like Sly's career at this point, we went on a show previously talked about Rocky Five, which was a big downturning point for his career, and I talked about how much I enjoyed Rocky Five, and I still enjoy that movie quite a bit. It's pretty high in my Rocky rankings, and I think I do have problems with Sylvester Stallone over his career. Even some movies that people do enjoy, I don't find myself doing that because he's just very hit or miss for me, and that's a
Mhm.
surprising thing coming from somebody who picked Judge Dredd. You'd think he just hits every time he's on screen, but he doesn't. He really. I would probably agree with you that outside of Rocky and Rambo, um, he has more misses than hits, and this is coming from somebody who also enjoyed some of the Expendables films. I think those were very miss for some people. And they
Well,
had a lot of the problems that people have with him.
like I said, it's more like he walks this tightrope.
Right.
Like you take a movie like Cobra, which it's a movie I should hate. It's just I hate everything that movie stands for, kind of similar to how I hate everything that this movie stands for. We'll get to that. Just a total like Reagan era anti-civil like anti-civic rights piece of fascist propaganda. But for some reason, man, he commits to the bit in that movie and he really works to prove that he is one of the great action stars. And that effort is not on display here. I think
Hmm.
he took the money and ran, and I don't see a shred of sweat breaking Sylvester Stallone's brow as he tries to bring this character to life. I just don't see any inkling that he was invested in this project any more than it being a thing for his own vanity, like I said previously. Is that too harsh?
Um, I don't think it's too harsh because I think, like you said, if somebody walks a tightrope like he does and did around this time, um, he could fall either which way for you, and he could fall a different way for somebody else. And I think the way that he fell for you is very clear. And the way that he fell for me, believe it or not, is sort of like he just fell right into a split. You know, um, I want to say this. There's a few complaints that are wrapped up into Sylvester Stallone that kind of cover the rest of the ugly section here. Because with his involvement of the movie, you see a lot more unfaithfulness to the source material. A huge complaint amongst the reviews that I read. I did not know there were so many Judge Dredd comic fans before I read the reviews for this movie. I'm starting to think that maybe not all of them were, but we'll move on from that. I get that complaint. I mean, the fucking Blu-ray for this movie and the VHS cover. There's two VHS covers and two Blu-ray covers. One of which with his helmet on, which we'll be using for the art for this show. But the other one is him in the standard uniform holding a gun, and it's clearly Sylvester Stallone. Um, for me, I have one thing that I want to say that puts him in the good for me, and one thing that I want to say that puts him in the bad for me. The thing that I want to say that puts him in the good for me is overall, I do like his performance in this. I don't hate it. I like what he's doing. I like the character, even though it's not what I'd expect from Judge Dredd. I think Karl Urban captured it almost perfectly in his movie. That's a movie that I will praise the shit out of. It's one of my favorite action movies ever. Is Dredd from 2012. Straight up, one of my favorites. I love that movie, and I will watch it any point in time. I will never say no to a rewatch of Dredd. But I do think, as in a similar way to the way that I appreciated the Mario Brothers movie, I think I appreciate what this character can do on its own and how what it stands for on its own and some of the things that it does and the way that the story works for and against the character. I enjoy all of those things, and his performance within some of those story beats, I enjoy. I like when he gets a little bit more somber. I like when he's second guessing himself and thinking about like this whole thing that I've devoted my life for, and quite literally, he finds out he was made for. Um, he's now questioning and has a reason to second guess. And even though there are still principles that are in him, he second guesses it, and I love that aspect of the story and his performance. But there's part of him that also leans to the bad side, and that side is the side of the vanity. Like you said, this does very much feel like he came in and said, "We're not going to sell tickets unless my face is all over this thing," and I could not disagree more. I think this movie could have done so well if you just put Stallone across the top. I don't even care if Stallone across the top of the poster is bigger than Judge Dredd at the bottom. I don't care about that. You could put his name as big as you want across that poster on the top of that, top of the movie poster. Big Stallone covering most of his head. I don't care. You could put Judge Dredd this big at the bottom. It'll sell tickets. It would have sold tickets. It wouldn't have done it in the same way, but it's going to as much as if your face is on there. And it just bothers me that even though I don't absolutely hate the fact that they deviated a bit from the source material, deviated a lot from the source material, I don't hate that. I will allow a movie to try to stand on its own from its source material. I think it does it in a way that's so needless. And that's where my complaint comes in with Sylvester Stallone, because by all accounts, a lot of that came from him. That's where I can no longer defend him.
I just didn't get any of that from his performance. None of the qualities that you saw as being something worthwhile about what he's doing here just didn't come across to me. I've seen Sylvester Stallone be vulnerable. I've seen him be somber. He's a
Right.
great actor when he's really giving himself to the part.
I
And
will
I
agree.
never saw that here. I mean, Rocky Five, which is in many ways a bigger disaster than this movie, I thought he was much more excellent in that because his heart is still in that franchise. And Judge Dredd, I bet you $100 he ain't ever picked up a Judge Dredd comic before or
Oh,
after
no.
filming this movie, right?
No.
And look, it doesn't even matter to me that much if he wears the helmet or not. That's not the problem. It's what's going on under the helmet. And there's not much. Again, I'm sure there every instinct he has in this performance is something that he would give to whatever shitty B movie that he was working on at the time. His stupid catchphrases, his a romance with a woman half his age that he has no chemistry with.
Give him a little bit of credit. Shoot, they were 19 years difference.
Oh, my bad. My bad. Forgive me.
No, I remember thinking watching this, like, man, like Diane Lane, like she doesn't look old by any stretch now, but she's like, you can tell that she's not the same age now as she was
Well,
then.
she's
And I'm
Ma
looking
Kent.
at her and
Yeah.
I'm like, God, she looks so young in this movie. How old was she? And I look and she's like in her late 20s, and I was like, how old is Sly? He's in his
He's
50s. I'm like,
not in
oh,
his late
okay.
20s. Yeah.
No, he was in his 50s by the time this came out. But it's just like, and I want to say, like, I understand that, because there are definitely parts of his performance in this, especially the stuff that's I think he took it as like, okay, this character's supposed to be stoic, but I don't care enough to make him stoic for the right reasons. I think that's where I sort of, the sense I got from like the scenes that were not as heavy in that, like, I have to show emotion here. I don't think he showed nearly as much emotion as I would have liked, as I've seen from him do, like, things that he could do in the past. I don't think it's his strongest performance, don't get me wrong, but it's not something that I did not like about this movie. I did enjoy it. Um, could I have expected more? Yes. And do I think he could have given more? Absolutely. But I don't hate what we got. I actually enjoy what we got.
I think part of the problem, I'm sure a really big part of the problem for me is not just his performance, is knowing the baggage he carried to the movie. That's what I mean. As soon as he got signed, there was only going to be so much that they could do with his character because he didn't
Mhm.
have the investment and he didn't have the passion. So what can they give him? He doesn't have much in the way of material, dramatic material outside of that one scene. I feel like people like Diane Lane, Max von Sydow, and in a certain way, Rob Schneider are carrying him through entire scenes. Not carrying him well in every case, but they're the ones doing the acting. And let's not beat up on Sly too much, especially because at his age he can still kick my ass. Let's move on to another performance that really just did not work for me. I thought it was laughable. Armand Assant. I've never seen him in anything else. I know he has some sort of indie cred from The Lord to Flatbush, another movie he did with Sly way back in the day. Quentin Tarantino called him the poor man's Al Pacino, and boy, it's like Quentin saw this movie and then wrote that description down because that sums it perfectly. He is trying to do the crazy, wacky, zany Al Pacino thing. This is after Scent of a Woman, after Scarface, and he does not have it in him to do that with any sort of charisma. I thought his performance was laughable. Then again, I don't think the dialogue they gave him really allowed him to do anything other than chew the scenery.
I won't go as far as to say I thought it was laughable. I did think it was quite bad for most of the movie. I think it turned a corner at that end. At the end, I think both of them gave their best performances at the end of the movie. And I don't know if they just wasted all their energy. Maybe they filmed that first. I don't know. I don't think Sly ever cared. Maybe that's the case for
You get
Armand
one
here.
good scene out of me. You
But
get one good scene.
you
That's what
get
Sly
one,
said.
yeah. He didn't care to do with the rest of it. But I'll say this much: I did think he was not great through most of the movie that he was in. In fact, I thought he was absolutely awful when we first meet him. I think he gets progressively a little better throughout the movie. Um, the thing that I think is laughable about him is they seem to like. I don't want to say the direction failed him in certain parts, but I do want to say like there's one scene that I almost saw what they were going for in his performance and his sort of subtleties that they were trying to do, but it just didn't work. And I don't know how much of that was him and how much of that was the direction. And it's the scene where he first gets his gigantic robot from this like storage locker.
Which is something I liked, by the way. I did like that robot.
Dude, it was so cool and it was so well done. There was a lot of stuff like that in this movie, and that goes into the production of this film. It was very competently made on all levels when it comes to sets that were built. Wardrobe, I think, was pretty competent. Just
Did
everything.
you like the cod pieces? You were telling me how much you like the wardrobe. Do you or do you not like the cod pieces designed by Gianni Versace?
Moving on.
I want a yes or a no, Connor.
You'll get nothing and like it. But no, I will say, like, I do agree with you. I think his performance went on to be better as the movie went on until we get to the last scene where I do quite like his performance as the movie gets into that climax. But before that, I can mostly agree with you. While I don't think it was laughable, I do not think it was any I don't think there was any good in there. So
Yeah, I thought it was laughable.
Yeah.
I don't think literally every scene is cringy,
no.
but the only memorable parts are cringy. And let me tell you something about that scene that I praised. I, as much as I had said that, as much as I think that those actors are at their best in that scene also proves to me that they were not the right actors for this. Like, properly cast actors, like Karl Urban, could have done so much more with that scene. And Al Pacino, not the poor man's Al Pacino, could have really, like, that could have been Heat with Judge Dredd or something.
You know what? Let's think about this. Let's think about this for a second. And this is something I have not thought of before right now, so we're probably going to need to cut some of this out. But who else in 1995 would you have liked to have seen give Dredd a try?
Peter Weller, he knows how to act with
Peter
only
Weller.
his mouth. I thought this was a very like dumbed down RoboCop. I should have brought that up.
I guess that's fair. I don't know that this movie could have been as cool though without like an action hero. I do like that they did cast an action hero as Judge Dredd. I think with Karl Urban, I think it worked because of who he is, but he's able to mold himself to be whatever you want him to be in that role. But I don't know of a lot of actors around this time that would have been that. I saw a review saying should have been Jean-Claude, which made me laugh. I think he would have given a much worse performance. But it did get me thinking for a split second of like, who is somebody who could have done this? And honestly, man, like, I don't think of a lot of names from around this time period. Like, you really kind of just had what, like Sly and Arnold.
This was the period of the action star. Everybody would have
Right.
wanted to have their face out of that helmet at some point.
I would agree with that, probably.
I think a Judge Dredd movie or TV show or whatever they want to do is going to have a better chance now because actors do not have that clout to make demands anymore unless you are Dwayne the Rock Johnson. And I've been meaning to compare Sylvester Stallone in this to Dwayne Johnson for this entire review. Perfect opportunity. Same way
Man.
that The Rock came in and acted like he was the boss, like he was the guy who was going to make the calls for not only Black Adam but for the whole universe, I guess. I mean, if what Zachary Levi is talking about is true, by the way, I don't give a fuck about Zachary Levi not getting a cameo. This is just a testament to The Rock's sort of how seriously he took himself. And I compare that exactly. If Sylvester Stallone was invited to be in a cinematic universe, he would have run that ship the same way. So
I will give one turning point to that, and I just want to say this, just to kind of before I say this, as a bit of a precursor, I guess, if you will. I was really, really disappointed about all that stuff that came out about The Rock, because like that's a childhood hero of mine. Like I grew up a WWF fan, WWE fan, whatever. The Rock was the guy, and I've watched his movies since his first film. I've loved to see what he's been able to accomplish, even though I don't like some of his recent stuff, like as far as his movies go. Like as we got into like the late 2010s and he really blew up, I think there's a lot of movies in there that are just like they're gonna make a ton of money, and I'm really happy for him, but they're just not my kind of movies. Things like Rampage and you know I don't
San
even San
Andreas.
Andreas. Yeah, I think there's like a couple in there that I just don't care. But I'm happy for the guy. And then this stuff comes out about the Shazam stuff. And the one thing that I will separate from this is I think the Shazam stuff came more from a place of I finally have this thing that I've been clawing for, as opposed to I'm clinging to my career. I think at the time Stallone was really kind of clinging to everything he had left, and he did not want to let his ego take a hit from some of these films that really did not do very well. Whereas The Rock was like, okay, I've been attached to this project for a decade now. This is going to go my way, and it is going to go that way because I am not letting this slip through my fingers again. And while I don't think either of them are justified, I do think they come from slightly different places. And I do think that The Rock would deserve a chance to redeem himself, where at the time I would have liked Stallone to have taken some time off, which he really didn't have a choice to do. I mean, by the 2000s, for a while before like Rambo and stuff, like he was doing like what, Spy Kids 3D, and like he was
That's what
not
I
in the
mean,
same
man.
place that he was.
This whole period is what I call the humbling age, the humbling era for Sylvester Stallone. And I
I don't
think
think The Rock needs it the same way that Stallone does. I
you
think
don't
he
think The
got
Rock
his
needs to be
humbling.
humbled.
I think he got humbled by the fucking failure that Black Adam was.
I would like
I
to see
think
him publicly acknowledge this because
I would like to see that too.
he's refusing to admit what he did and what he's responsible for.
I will
But
agree with that.
getting back to Judge Dredd, we're talking about actors that we would like to see in this role. And the problem is, I think getting a star for this character kind of defeats the point. You are exactly right. Judge Dredd is a symbol in the way that a lot of those classic era superheroes are. So what I want to see is them do something like a Christopher Reeve situation. Famously, Christopher Reeve was not a name. He was not famous in any sense of the word, and they took a chance on him, and that worked out so well that he's become still the definitive Superman. I mean, I know Henry Cavill has his fans, and I actually like Brendan Routh a lot, but I still think that Christopher Reeve is the first actor you would think of. That's what I would want to see for a Judge Dredd thing, or do a Michael Keaton thing and get somebody who you would never expect to work in that role.
I could be on board with that. I could definitely be on board with that. Yeah, I think they were in a tough spot to cast this character in the mid '90s. So I don't blame them for going with Sly. I mean, if you look at Sly in the helmet, I mean, he looks great. Like just helmet up, or I guess waist up. I mean, the guy looks great. He's got like, I could see how somebody would look at Sly and like the way he talks and the way his mouth moves and go, man, he would be good for Judge Dredd. I just think it was bad timing, and I think this movie falls into that category of just wrong place, wrong time. Um, Hollywood Pictures made this movie in 1995, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do for them. And critically, it definitely didn't do what they wanted it to do. I mean, truthfully, I don't know that they really gave a fuck about the critics, but they wanted it to make a lot of money, and neither of those things really panned out. And it's hard to say who would have been better in this role. I mean, the people around this time that could have been potentially cast, all exactly what you said. They would have done this same thing. They would have. I mean, Arnold would have wanted to show his face a bunch. Steven Seagal would have wanted no helmet on him at any point in time.
Look, somebody brought up JCVD, and if you could get somebody to dub over him, I would not mind that.
I wouldn't be too mad at it either. But I don't think we could have done that. I don't think he would have done that. I think that's his big no because, as his career went on, I mean, look at the characters he played, man. Like Guile from Street Fighter, like
Je suis the law.
like I don't know, man. I just I don't hate the idea of JCVD if you're going to pick somebody that's like an action type, but I don't like anything that he would have done with it. It's really hard to cast that character at this time, and I could see where they'd land on Sylvester Stallone.
I actually think I have a really good idea.
Ooh,
Dolph Lundgren.
So, Dolph, I think, could have been
instead of Rocky, get Ivan Drago, and we're about to talk about one of Dolph's vehicles that is not dissimilar from this, not dissimilar from Judge Dredd.
He would have gotten a lot more money to play with here, but he's done that a few times in his career. I mean, let's not forget, in addition to, by the way, by the time this video comes out, we have announced the Punisher special on our Patreon, covering all 3 Punisher films. Dolph Lundgren being one of our Punishers. But in addition to being the Punisher, he was also in Masters of the Universe, another on big screen adaptation, if you will, that did not go over great with fans. And I think Dolph is here's the disconnect for me with Dolph. I think he would have been awesome in this, but I think he would have had to cut a lot of the more emotional stuff because he's just not that good at that. He's not a good.
Neither is Sly in this. And I'm not even sure
Sly in this is better than Dolph would have been.
I disagree. I actually really
That's
disagree.
A fair disagreement. That's a fair disagreement.
And I think Dolph has a very specific side of his acting that excels. I think what I'm thinking of is a performance like what he gives in Universal Soldier. Have you seen that?
Not only have I seen Universal Soldier, but I'm going to raise you one better here. There is a movie that I am going to get on this show, but I don't think it will attract people the same way that some of these other movies that we will cover is. So I've been pushing this back literally since like week 3 of this show, because I've been worried about nobody giving a fuck. And the movie is Universal Soldier Regeneration, a straight to DVD sequel to that.
Connor.
No, hear me out here.
Oh, no.
Dolph Lundgren's performance in that movie is very similar to his performance in the original Universal Soldier film. And this is actually a movie that the sequel to Universal Soldier Regeneration, it's called Day of Reckoning, is actually not eligible for this show. It's above a 3. Because those 2 movies are actually regarded as the best ones in the Universal Soldier franchise. And they're both direct to DVD. Yeah. So looking at Regeneration, his performance is very it's almost like all of his emotion is in his head and he's having a hard time processing it. And that's how they play it in Universal Soldier, the first one. Yes. So that kind of performance, I do think would have worked in certain parts of this movie, but I don't know that the confrontational parts of this movie he would have been as good at, where I think Sly is sort of perfect for that, where even when he's not on his game, I know you didn't enjoy him in those scenes, but I did think he was at the very least better than Dolph would have given us. But I do think Dolph would have delivered a performance that would have been much more humble at this time. And for that, I will say I will agree with you here. I would really like to see what that would have turned out to look like.
I think Dolph is more the Karl Urban type. I think he's more of a team player. Not saying that I really don't know if there are any stories of his ego getting out of control, but he definitely really throws himself into a role. He can play a hero and a villain with the same enthusiasm because he is really interested in exploring his characters from all sides. He can go from playing the Punisher to playing the villain in Universal Soldier, and I think he is a pretty underrated actor in that respect. I mean, he's just one of those kind of underappreciated guys in general. I know a lot of people think he's like this dumb, oafish blonde, but he is like a he's like a master's degree or something.
Oh no, like he's very intelligent in real life. I think the disconnect for me is that some of his acting feels just very forced and wooden, but I also think that I don't think much of that is his fault because that's the thing, man. When people blame an actor for being for accepting a role that might not be extremely compatible with them, like I think that's what sort of ruins some actors' careers, and what I think did for Dolph's for a while. I mean, he made some fucking awful movies, for a period of time.
Sure.
In like the late '90s, early 2000s. I mean, his career was done until probably Universal Soldier Regeneration and then Expendables. He was really doing nothing, and now he's in fucking Old Spice commercials, and I'm pretty sure he was in one of the Creed movies, wasn't he?
Creed 2.
Yeah.
And he
So
was very good. And I think that's another movie where I saw acting chops. I'm not saying that he is a better actor than Sly. I'm saying
no,
that I think he had the temperament that would have allowed him to step into this role with much more passion, and just he would have left his ego at the door better. And I think that's what it really comes
I'd
down
like to
to for
think
me.
that too. I'd like to think that too. Yeah, and I will say, like, I will say that even though I did like Sly in this movie overall, there's things I really didn't like and can't defend. I would really like to see how it would turn out with Dolph.
Yeah. I mean, we can kind of get a preview of it with The Punisher, which, you
Kinda.
know, you can subscribe to our Patreon at any
Yeah.
tier in order to hear that. And you can hear us talk about the Thomas Jane version and the Ray Stevenson version. So,
Only one of those is going to reach our YouTube channel before or around the same time as Patreon. So make sure that you subscribe to the Patreon to make sure you can watch all of the Punisher or watch us talk about all of the Punisher movies and see if you disagree with us, hate us, or maybe like what we're saying a little bit. But for now, we're still on Judge Dredd. And the last thing that I want to bring up real quick in this section, just real quick from my side, is something that the audience did have a big complaint on. I touched on a little bit on how I felt, so I'd like to get your take. It's just the overall story of the film. We see Judge Dredd is introduced at the beginning of this movie as this guy who's very well known around this Earth that this city that they're in. That's pretty much all of Earth, but that's where we are. And he's very well known. He's very revered. He's known as the guy who's upstanding in his field, but he is eventually framed for murder by his hidden brother, and who escapes from prison and tries to build an army of clones of himself, which we learn Sly and his brother basically are themselves. I said I really did. I dig the story of this movie. I know many people don't. Where do you fall?
it is not Doug. It is not Doug by me, Connor. And let me tell you why, son. This is a total.
Son.
Just throwing that out there. This is a total first draft of the screenplay. Decent ideas. Decent ideas that they should have gone back to explore. Bad ideas that they should have gone back to take out. Like structurally, this thing is anorexic. Like Judge Dredd doesn't have a real scene with Rico until the very end of the movie. You want to set up that dynamic. You want to give it some time to be fleshed out. I think the X-Men movies are a perfect example. And Professor X and Magneto don't even need to fight in order for their rivalry to really be explored. That's not what makes it exciting. These are two warring ideologies. And I just thought these were two guys who were equal. They were equally crazy, but on totally different sides of the law. And I didn't realize that the writers were even trying to set up some sort of theme, some sort of juxtaposition until the climax. So that's why I'm going to say I don't dig the story. I dig what the story could have been. I mean, that whole army of clones thing, that sounds like classic Judge Dredd to me. I don't think that was a bad idea. In fact, probably my single favorite shot of the movie is when that first clone pops up, and I got really excited. I thought we were headed to
Dude, those things look sick
I
too.
thought we were headed to B movie territory, like Roger Corman territory. I was pumped, and then no, uh, no, uh, just just another thing that the movie really didn't follow through on. Frankly, So yeah, story just was a very rushed to me, very rushed, far too lean.
It's interesting because I actually kind of liked that we learned this stuff with Sylvester Stallone. Like we learn the seeds are planted when he talks about the fact that he had to turn in his best friend and judge him, and then sort of as the story goes on, we learn like here who we kind of can presume that it is, and then he escapes, and then he frames Judge Dredd. How did he frame Judge Dredd? Then the DNA stuff comes out. How did he get the DNA? How did that happen? Then this whole fabrication thing starts, and then this whole like look at it early, looking at the future of Photoshop in this movie, with the little baby picture, which I thought was
Dude, that
hilarious.
cracked me
Um,
up
oh no,
when
it was
they
hilarious.
when they revealed that little baby is just sitting in
In
some
a
kind of
lab,
like
yeah.
metal chamber. Like
Yeah, it was it
that was
was it was
insane.
funny. There were some things that weren't fully fleshed out with it, but I'll say this much: like I actually liked how it was progressing, and I liked the fact that we learn a lot of this stuff with the character, so that by the time that we meet, we're like, oh man, like here's Rico who already knows all this information, and here's Judge Dredd who's just learned everything, and not only has he just learned everything, but he's just lost who he found out is truthfully kind of his father and the person he's been closest with. And here's this other girl that he's with now that he's, as fond of a person as he can be with, but now she might be in danger and something might be happening there. And he has this annoying guy by his side, but he's also making a lot of good points. And there's a lot of things that I really like about how we take this journey with the character. So I don't quite agree with you, but I do think that our end sequence should have been extended so we got more of the Dredd brothers facing off with each other. I will say that I think that should have been longer, but I like where it was.
Maybe I would agree with you if Judge Dredd had anything resembling a character arc in this movie. If Sylvester Stallone had anything but one mode to his performance in this movie. But Judge Dredd, I was shocked. He literally does not change at all. There's no indication that this man has changed. In fact, he only seems to be reinforced in his belief in this extremely flawed legal system that he had dedicated himself to. I mean, tell me, what am I missing? What change do you see in his character from minute one to minute done? He learns all of these lies that he's been told. He's challenged to kill his brother, literally his only family. And I don't see a shred of uh of change or evolution by the end of it. He goes back to being a street judge. He talks to people as coldly and as dispassionately as ever. He lets Diane Lane plant a kiss on him.
Here's what I think about what you said there. I don't completely disagree with you. I would have liked the movie personally better if Judge Dredd decided to take the role that he was offered and he was like, "You know what? I think it's time to retire from being a street judge. Like I'm gonna take this on. I'm gonna rebuild with law that makes sense. That's not flawed and doesn't lead to another circumstance like mine. I would have liked that more. What I did see though was that here's a character who is going to remain mostly stoic and is going to do his job to the best of his ability as he did before. But um, if you notice, he doesn't smile much throughout most of the movie, and he does give us like he's like straight up laughing at the end of this movie, like driving through the crowd of people, everybody's cheering for him. What I like to think is that at the end of the movie, he knows what he is going to do. He's going to do his part to rebuild after this tragic event, and everybody else will do their part, and that's how it's going to be. But truthfully, with the ending that they gave us, it's very hard to take anything away from it. And it's not a problem I have with the movie, but it is a neutral. It's something I guess. Um, I like it because it feels good. Like like the crowd is cheering, and he's driving away, and he's laughing and smiling, and you're like, okay, that feels good. But you're like, we don't really get any closure on what's gonna happen now. Like they didn't immediately turn to Diane Lane and be like, well, I guess you're the leader now. Like nothing really happened. So I will relent and say that I don't think they gave us enough to take away, but my takeaway was that he seems like at least a bit of a different character now, and I just took away of that he's just going to do his best with his knowledge now to be the change that he wants to see out on the streets. I don't know if
Man,
I'm going to take that away. Maybe I'm stretching.
are
But
you Mr.
that's what I took away.
Fantastic? Because that was a
Fuck
stretch.
you. Oh, you son
I'm
of a bitch.
sorry, man. I
No,
was looking for
I get it.
anything. I was
I
I
get
was
it.
shocked. Like all you had to do really was, let's say they're about to wheel off Rob Schneider to prison, rightfully so. And Judge Dredd steps in and says, "Hey, you know what? This is a good man. He helped me. Not all criminals are bad," or some shit. That's all you would really have to do. And he just like, and
Some shit.
to be fair, Rob Schneider did save his life, right? He helped save the
Yeah.
day. I don't like his performance at all, but that's the story of the
His
movie.
character means something. Yeah.
So Judge Dredd doesn't even acknowledge him. Like he has no bond or attachment to this person that he's gone on this huge adventure with. He's just like still that machine to me. He's like a being that is programmed uh, to abide by the law, and I don't see that wavering at all. And the movie makes you think like it's actually going to challenge some of the really fascist undertones of this whole society. And again, I feel like it was almost reinforced. It was bizarre. And it's one of those things where I feel like Sylvester Stallone would not have permitted anything other than people cheering him on as he kissed Diane Lane and drove away on his cool motorcycle. I mean, that's speculation, but that's the only explanation I have because it was so much of a nothing ending to tack on to this movie.
I will give you that much. Even though, I think the ending leaves a lot to be desired. I'm not disappointed in it, but I do wish that we did get a little bit more. I will say that, like, yeah, I mean, there's not much that you could take away from this without coming to your own conclusion.
Okay.
And I think that's what both of us did. And I can absolutely appreciate the point that you brought up because it really does not give us anything, and I can absolutely acknowledge that.
It felt to me like he enjoyed the power of being a straight judge. He didn't want to let it go. For you brought up that he's stoic. I didn't even see his performance as stoic. He does a lot of mugging for a stoic performance. A lot of classic Sylvester Stallone scowls, like the face he's making right behind me. He makes a lot
Well,
of
that's a
corny
very Judge
jokes.
Dredd face. That's a very Judge Dredd face that he's got going on behind you. I mean, Judge Dredd's making the same face on my comic book here. He's making the same face on all the other ones. There was at least an effort when he had the helmet on, like he does behind you, to look like Judge Dredd because he does.
All
I
right,
mean, him and Karl Urban have a lot of parallels there, but
they do.
outside of that, I will agree.
It's the difference between and frankly, I think Carl Urban could have stood to do less scowling too. I just think it's a very obvious choice when you're playing a character named Judge Dredd. But with Sylvester Stallone, it's so hammy that I feel like it really jumps out at me. But I think I'm done judging this movie, and I think we've basically addressed all the audience complaints, right? I mean, Rob Schneider,
Yeah, we
total
did.
total lack of faithfulness to the source material. In fact, it's crazy that Diane Lane is in this movie because this movie is unfaithful.
Well, before we get to our final verdicts,
All right.
I would like to bring up a few things because we have two actors that are now returning to the show with this movie, and I just wanted to highlight them real fast. The second appearance from Dr. Wynn actor Mitchell Ryan, who appeared on the show for our Halloween special, Halloween 6, coming back to the show for the second time. We are also welcoming back Ewan Bremner from Alien versus Predator. This is his second appearance on this show. It could easily be not their last performances between the two of them. But I did at least want to bring up that they were making another appearance on this show. I believe they have as many appearances as Timothy Oliphant at this point. So tied at 2 for the most appearances on Not That Bad, from what I could tell.
What an
I
honor.
might be wrong in that.
What
Yeah.
an honor.
I might be wrong in that, but Yes, I think it's time we get into our final verdicts. I don't think it's any secret where you're coming down, but I'd like to
Don't
hear
do that to
you.
me, man. Don't do
No, I'm
that to me.
joking.
Don't
I'm
put me
joking.
in a
I'm joking.
box. All
I'm
right.
joking. I'm joking. No, I really would like to hear your final verdict on this because you did have some kind things to say about this, and I'd like to hear where, like, what your final thoughts are and where your final verdict's going to land.
I think this movie is totally a product of this really weird era of comic book movies post Batman 89 where there was a lot of growing pains. I'm comparing it to real disasters of that era, something like Shaquille O'Neal's Steel, right? Or more
Mm.
famously, Batman and Robin. And this movie isn't anywhere near that. It's not a disaster. Uh, it has a 2.5 on Letterbox, which to me, it's like, it's almost a good movie. I think I'm a little too old for it. I think the sensibilities that it's pandering to are very adolescent and juvenile. There's a lot of shooting. There's, some cool motorbike chases, some really handy performances. I think if I were in high school and if I was binging Sylvester Stallone's movies, this is something that would blend right in and I would have a good time with. But there's something I should have brought up. To those of you like me who grew up watching Nostalgia Critic, he reviewed this movie and he did a very infamous movie of his own, The Nostalgia Critic. He made his own movie called To Boldly Flee, in which he puts on the Judge Dredd costume and imitates Sylvester Stallone for something like 20 minutes. I thought that was so obnoxious that frankly, I really never want to see this guy again. Either the Nostalgia Critic or Sylvester Stallone's interpretation of Judge Dredd. So it's just something that has not aged well. It's only made worse by the fact that we have a really great adaptation of Judge Dredd to compare this with, because man, there's really no reason why you need to see this and not the Karl Urban version. So unfortunately, I do think people are right on the money. A 2.5 indeed. It is that bad.
Fair point, good sir. Fair point, good sir. I will, I guess, relay my final verdict. I am adolescent and child enough to enjoy this movie. I think of it like this. I had the benefit of knowing what this movie was before watching it, and I knew the reputation it had. I knew that it was regarded as one of the least faithful adaptations of a comic book character, one of the worst movies to come out of the mid '90s. This came out the same year as Batman Forever, which they don't feel anything alike. This Judge Dredd honestly almost feels like it came out in the early '90s as opposed to the mid '90s, which is why it feels so much like Mario Brothers.
Feels even
Um,
more dated.
it
Yeah.
does in that way it does. But I'll say this, like I think knowing that stuff ahead of time benefited me when watching the movie because man, I had a blast with it. There were so many moments that I had so much fun with. There were things that I definitely did not like about the movie that did stop my enjoyment for certain periods of time. Rob Schneider. But there are things that I also very much enjoyed about it. And as I discussed in our Mario Brothers episode, I don't mind when something is not faithful to the source material. I think I'm going to give the movie a chance to stand on its own and still do a good job of entertaining me and giving me a good experience. I think this movie did an okay job at doing that. It's a movie that I could defend and say good things about. However, on the other side of that, I do have to say that I agree with my co-host in saying that when you do have the comparison of both of the movies, if you're going to pick one, don't pick this one. Pick Dread from 2012. But if you're anything like me and you just like to go back and watch a cheesy action movie with some fun, some bad, some good, some ugly, and just have a good time, I think this is a good movie to do it with. So I cannot go as far as I did previously in other episodes, but I can definitively say that I believe that Judge Dredd from 1995 is not that bad.
Well, that's the name of our show. So that worked out perfectly.
Yes, it did. Yeah, yeah. Our average for this episode is going to be hard to calculate, but honestly, yeah, I'm sorry to bring you this. I did not know the nostalgia critic story from you, or else I would not have made you go through this.
You know what? I
All I have to say
forgot.
is payback from Waterworld. That's all I'm gonna say here.
I This is nowhere near as bad as Waterworld. You're
No,
right.
no, it's not. No,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my God. Will Waterworld continue to be the worst thing we've talked about as far as a
Um,
complete lack of entertainment value?
isn't it amazing that on a show that's covered Halloween Resurrection, this movie, Nothing But Trouble, most my picks, so all of them have been my picks so far. But isn't it funny that a show like ours that has covered so many movies that could be considered just awful, um, somehow, some way, Waterworld will be the bane of our existence until a movie comes along and shocks us and somehow upsets the awful experience we both had watching that movie.
I mean, I hope it gets dethroned because that's kind of a sad state of affairs.
Ah,
As
sorry, Kevin Costner.
yeah, but
Oh
Judge
boy.
Dredd has been judged. We judged it. I guess we sentenced it to 5 years at a penal colony.
I would say 3 years, maybe 16 months on good behavior.
Okay, I'm gonna go 5 years with possibility of parole after 3. How about that?
There, I will relent and I will virtually shake hands with you on that.
Yeah, but Rob
Uh,
Schneider gets life.
Right, Rob Schneider gets fucking life. Don't put this man in another movie or television show or podcast or anything. Please.
Adam Sandler, if you
stop.
do another Grown Ups, don't even try to Zoom with Rob Schneider. Don't get a voice cameo. I don't want anything from this man. All right. I'm talking to you,
Please.
Adam. Listen to me. I know he's your friend, but
I know
friendship
it.
has limits.
Just send him some money or something. Just pay him even if he's not in it. Just leave us, let us be with this. But we have to move on at some point to close out the episode. So I want to thank everybody for watching. I know most of you will be so enthralled with this movie pick, but I do hope that if you are, I hope if anything that we said resonated with you in talking about some of the positives about this movie, I hope you'll go check it out. It is available to stream currently. You can also purchase it on any streaming renting platform, Blu-ray, anything that you need. And I think some of you will have a really good time with this, and some of you will feel like Gabe does. So
Hey, now,
yeah,
this was a fun discussion. This was a really fun discussion, and that's why it separates it from a Water World, which I literally could not find anything to even ironically enjoy about that movie, other than some production value stuff. Like we get to laugh,
other than us hearting Dennis Hopper the whole time.
but we get to laugh at how often Sylvester Stallone shouts, "I am the law," and we get to laugh as other
Or
people.
how many times he said, "I knew you'd say that."
That one got on my nerves. I really had no
it just made
patience
me
for
laugh
that.
after a while.
But the nostalgia critic thing, by the way, if either of you, I'm sorry, if any of you guys out there listening have also been scarred by the nostalgia critic, um, please let me know. Let's start like a support group or something. If you've seen To Boldly Flee, that's a show that could never be on here because it is one of the worst things ever. I was about to like qualify it some more. Like, no, it's just one of the worst things that anybody's ever
Oh,
done
good lord.
in the age of the internet. So let's get that support group going because I don't think
Let's get it
Connor's even
going.
heard of this guy.
No, I used to watch Nostalgia Critic. I just got to a point where I just didn't care anymore, so I stopped watching. I never
Oh,
saw that.
you're a
though.
lucky one. You're
Never
one
saw
of the
that
lucky
though.
ones.
Yeah, I kind of got out early, but for anybody that for anybody that hopefully doesn't get out early on our show, thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and have enjoyed what we've given you so far. If you really like our stuff, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on our platforms for podcasting, no matter whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio, wherever you want to find us, we're probably there. You can find all of our links on our brand new website. That's notthatbadpod.com. You can find any links. You can find links to old episodes. We have a whole episode catalog of everything we've released. episode that you're watching right now. So go to that website, check out what we got. And there's another important website that we'd like to talk to you about if you really want to give us that extra beam of support. That's patreon.com/notthatbad. Gabe, what will they get if they subscribe on our Patreon?
I'll tell you what they will get if they don't subscribe. They'll get a mouthful of fist. No,
They'll get a knuckle fucking sandwich.
No, if they subscribe to our Patreon, they can hear us defend the Super Mario Brothers movie. They can hear us defend all of the Leprechaun movies. They can hear us talk about movies that any sane person would never go near, but we do, just for the sake of being able to share that with you guys, our supporters over at Patreon. And again, you can sign up for any tier and access these specials, the whole archive of specials, and we have plenty of other treats and goodies for you guys, for you loyal fans out there.
Yeah.
Complete with a Not That Bad sticker. So if you want to slap that on your forehead and show the world how cool you are, just go over to notthatbad.com or our Patreon and support us. Well, this has been a great time talking to y'all about Judge Dredd. I'm Gabe.
I'm Connor.
This is Not That Bad, signing out.